morning, listeners. Thanks again for being with us for another session of Coffee with Cow and Welcome. I'm Chris Lawler. I'm the Director and CEO of Learn International. We're a small boutique provider based in Ireland offering programming globally. Today we are chatting with Dale LaFleur, who's the Senior Director for Academic Affairs and Internationalization at NAFSA. Thanks for being with us, Dale.
Yes, thank you, Chris. It's nice to be with you today.
Splendid. What I thought we would do was start off and just talk about, I know that you're in international education and higher education and pushing on nearly 25 years now at this stage, and you have had many roles in various different institutions and, you know, on either side of teacher, students type piece. Could you take us through how you got to where you are now and, you know, some anecdotes along the way and those types of things?
Sure. You know, interestingly enough, when I was first setting out on my college path, I'm not even sure I was aware that international education was a professional field. So I entered college, really hadn't thought much about going abroad or studying elsewhere until my peers started talking about it. So it definitely was a peer influence on me when I was in college. I ended up studying abroad in England for a year, studying sociology at Leicester University. And it really opened my eyes, as with many people, when you have that experience studying in a different country, it opens your eyes to just new ways of thinking. I did quite a bit of traveling in Europe during that first year, visiting a few other students that I knew from my college, as well as just traveling via train on my own through Europe, which was really fun and exciting and exhilarating. And when I went back home, I finished college, I graduated, and I thought, wow, I really want to figure out how to do something like that in my career. But I didn't really know what it was named. I didn't know how to find out more about it. I didn't know how to pursue it. So really that study abroad experience was my first entree into the field of international education. Eventually I traveled cross country in the United States and I pursued a master's degree in what's called Student Development Administration at Seattle University. And there I had an assistantship working in the International Student Center. And that really allowed me to professionally start engaging in the field of international education. I was doing a lot of programming, a lot of advising, a lot of putting together resources for international students that were studying in the United States. Upon completion of my master's degree, I got a job opportunity at the University of Arizona. And so I moved from Seattle University to the University of Arizona and really started as an early career professional in the field. Again, assisting international students primarily. I was an international student advisor. I ran the international student orientation programs. I was also putting together various resources for international students that were entering the United States. And it was really a vast experience for me. I met people from all over the world during that time period of my life. And it really spoke to me as a career path that was a right choice for me. I felt like I was making a difference in people's lives, in their educational experiences, and I was also learning about the world at large myself through these students' experiences. So that's how I got started, and I think many people have a similar story, but it was that pivotal experience of me going abroad that really piqued my interest in the field.
Yeah, it is a very similar story to a number of folks that we've had on. Crucially, you know, I didn't know that this was an industry or an option as a career. That, you know, we get that a lot, you know, and I find it interesting because I think when I entered international education, it had kind of hit that I suppose saturation of people know that you can go and this can be your career. But I think it is still a young industry. It's still one of those things where you think of what has been achieved over the last 50 years. And if you put that in context with what's happened globally over the last 50 years in the kind of macro political context, it's really quite an interesting and very fast progression, I think. Just touching on one thing there, your study abroad experience was a year-long study abroad.
It was.
You know, this still happens, but it's a minute percentage of students that are going. So what study abroad is defined as, or let's not say defined as, but you know, the vast majority of study abroad programs seem to be kind of getting condensed, and there's that push for a distilled experience in a short amount of time as one can.
Right.
And the industry is grappling with balancing off delivering what, financial constraints or time to graduation or whatever the issues are for the student, with that broader and deeper experience, which is essentially what, part of the main motivation for studying abroad. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think as the field has evolved, and certainly the field of education has evolved, you see longer term programs are still an option chosen by a select few, but more and more students have the shorter term experiences abroad, often over the summers or over breaks of some kind. And those are still valuable, but oftentimes they lead up to perhaps a greater, deeper experience for a longer period of time. So some of the unique things that I like about short-term programs is they offer exposure, and they will get students somewhere, perhaps with a group or a leader, doing something that they might not have done on their own. But it may be an entree to them doing something longer term later on, whether it's through a graduate program or research, or maybe even working abroad on their own. And I think that's really important. So any exposure to me is good exposure, and it's just a matter of what it leads to and how you can build on those experiences in your future. I think for me, having that long experience early on was pivotal. I had never lived abroad before. I had never been abroad before that time. And it was quite an adventure for me. It was also hard to come home, because after the first year, I felt like I was finally getting into a rhythm of what it was like to live in that community. And then I had to leave. So I right there was interested in going back or going somewhere else next. So I think short-term experiences can also have those influences. And now that we're in the context we're in, we're even seeing new program models coming into play, whether it's virtual or otherwise. So I think there are many more opportunities to engage students abroad in a virtual sense as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how segueing to the virtual piece, which is, COVID has catalyzed everybody's interest in that and focus, and how the motivation being quick, how do we replace some form of international experience or some form of exposure to students in the short term that we're expecting it, and then what's its place in the long term or indefinitely in the institution or in the role of education and the delivery of it. And there are two different things. There's this hustle, quick, let's get something that's fit for purpose now. And there are many motivations for that in terms of requirements for fees paid, and are we delivering what we've said we will, and those types of things. And then afterwards, kind of as the dust is settling, I would say now and into spring, it's okay, well, what place does this have in our institution? From here on out. And I think what I have found, certainly talking with our partners and with, just in the industry in general, is that it's amazing the spectrum of engagement and preparation for adopting virtual into how a program is delivered, from it's kind of ignored and it's on an individual faculty basis, to we have a very tight, solid institutional policy in relation to that, which is well funded. We have a committee, that type of thing, and everywhere in between. And it's just, where does one start? It must be difficult.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There were some institutions that had been very successful in the virtual space pre-COVID-19. And after the pandemic started to escalate, we saw more and more institutions looking and seeking new ways to offer things virtually. And I think now it's going to become part of the fabric of international education. Too many institutions have pivoted. Like you said, there was this initial pivot. How do we start putting some of these courses online very quickly? That was more out of need than anything else. But now that they've proven and tested this protocol, I think more and more institutions are saying, why don't we continue doing this long term? Why weren't we doing this before? And we can provide these types of opportunities to such a broader number of students, address some of the issues of access that we were having in sending larger numbers of students abroad, and really bring some of that cultural experience back to the home campus through these virtual opportunities and virtual classrooms. And I think as you see more and more partnerships between international offices and perhaps the online education offices developing at at these campuses, you might even see mergers between those units. I've seen more and more conversations happening between people who are focused on online education and people who are focused on international education, and maybe coming together in a more formalized way on their respective campuses.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the place of internationalization in the face of, dire financial need a little bit later on. But I'm wondering, in terms of business model, when we're focusing on traditional study abroad and, the different components of a program. You went to Leicester for a year. So, the benefits of that academically, obviously, were that you were plucked from the States, brought over to the UK, and you were put into a British classroom with British classmates and presumably international classmates and those types of things. And so it's all part of this tactile experience that you have. Now, what we're looking at is some kind of a hybrid program where, you're looking to take the credits that you need in an online fashion. What is the benefit of you taking your online courses from Leicester as opposed to University of Arizona or Cal State or wherever it is that you are? And what is the benefit to the institution that the student is studying at to promote that they take courses from another institution when actually it's just as easy to take their online course and they receive the tuition?
I think the benefits really stem from that cultural exchange and that ideation process. So when students are only immersed in one environment and they're only learning from one system, it's very easy to not recognize that there are different ways of thinking or different approaches or different cultural attitudes towards different disciplines. So I think by creating some of these hybrid options between institutions even, whether it's a dual degree or some sort of joint program, to me, that's ideal because a student can be exposed to two different institutions, perhaps in two different countries. Different faculty are teaching those courses, different students are taking those courses. You're engaging in a broader spectrum in that discipline. So to me, that's ideal. So whenever you focus on one or the other, you have to make that choice, right? Is this one better than that one for this topic? And for different disciplines, it could vary on which one you perceive to be better than the other. But if you really start thinking, how can we bring these two institutions together or this type of learning together to advance the students' learning, I think that's really where I see some very innovative thinking happening. And whether it's between institutions, I think it advances students' learning opportunities as well. And ideally, it advances the professions and it advances the research that we're able to do. And when you think about the field of international education, advancement and innovation are clearly two key components of the field of international education. The field has changed so much just since I entered it 25 years ago. And I think a lot of that is due to innovation and advancement. And we're seeing a critical, pivotal time in our country's history and in the global history, actually, where education systems are starting to reevaluate the paradigm. And they're starting to think about making some pivotal changes in the system and in this infrastructure, which is hard. And you always need some sort of pivotal disruption to force that to happen. And in our case, this COVID-19 pandemic has been that disruption. And it's really stopped the paradigm as we all knew it. And everybody's now shifting due to that disruption. And I think there's going to be some very new, creative, innovative program models that are introduced, and it will continue to advance the field of education overall and provide new opportunities for future generations of students. So
it's ripe for disruption at the moment.
It is, and disruption's hard. It makes people uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It makes us uneasy. We know what we know because of the paradigms we all experienced. But what happens when all of that changes? And making people feel uncomfortable is okay. Though many people, that uncertainty does influence a lot of people in a negative way. So you have to be able to be comfortable with uncertainty and rethink the paradigm. And that can be really challenging to do.
Yeah, the vested interest within higher education and maintaining the status quo of how things work in the model of delivery and particularly the financial model is there. But I think there seems to be a wide held kind of begrudging acceptance that it's broken, and you're looking at outside of maybe very top second tier universities and your Ivy League, if you're looking at ROI from what it costs to educate yourself here to say master's level, because there is this dissolution of the value of a degree relative to a master's, relative to a higher master's, whatever it is, and looking at that, particularly when you put it in context globally, when you can go and do a master's in Holland for 2,000 or one in Germany for free, or those types of things at quality institutions. It's a difficult piece. I think what's happening with COVID, as you say, is this catalyst for this disruption, and people are sticking their head up and looking around and saying, well, how is everybody else doing it? And realize there are different ways about it. So, it's watch this space. The lack of goalposts to go towards is causing a lot of stress, I think.
It is. And I also think what we see, there's a pain point in the field of international education right now happening as universities are implementing things like furloughs or staff reductions or, salary reductions, and people are even rethinking their own training and their own skills and how are these skills transferable? Maybe there are opportunities to go back and pursue certifications or other degrees. So there's this other underlying conversation that's happening with people in the field right now that feel insecure in their current roles or staff positions, and are thinking about other paths and how they can use the skills and the different things that they've utilized in this field elsewhere, or can they retool themselves to help become relevant to these new ideas and these new innovations that are coming out within the field of higher education. And I know several years ago when I was a working professional, I pursued my doctoral degree as a working professional and completed that. And it was really a wonderful moment for me in my career to go back and re-engage from a scholarly perspective in the field of international education after having been a practitioner for over 10 years, and sort of re-engage with the scholarship. And it has allowed me opportunities to teach. I've taught some courses. I've taught a course online this past spring, as a matter of fact. And it really helps me to understand the field from the teaching and learning perspective, as well as the practitioner perspective. So those opportunities to retool are very important. And I think there are many people in the profession who are looking to do that right now in order to get the skills that they may need for the future career of international education.
I think that's true of many industries. Speaking with friends both in the States and in Europe, people are looking at anybody who's in any way tied to international transport or any form of tourism whatsoever is thinking, okay, well, what's happening and when are skies opening again and those types of things. You can't help but do that. But that retooling and training, I suppose that in and of itself offers institutions that are able to fulfill that need and opportunity at the moment in terms of the mass numbers of people that would be looking to either side step or change sector or those types of things. But if I could just revert to your teaching, it's funny, just as you were saying it there, I don't know, we've maybe had 30 or 40 people on the podcast, but we actually haven't had anybody focused in any way on teaching whatsoever. So while that's not your main focus, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are on the online course you delivered relative to in-person, and was it more challenging, and what was your thoughts in relation to that?
Yeah, so this was the first online course that I taught, and it was actually scheduled to be an online course before COVID-19 happened. So I had the benefit of at least already having the course in an online platform and setting it up to teach in that way. The program that I was teaching in is an online program. So I didn't have to make a transition suddenly in the middle of the semester, which I know many faculty did have to do. For me, one of the biggest learning curves was just how do I engage with these students when I'm not engaging with them in person in a classroom setting. So, there are different ways you can do that. And I sought advice from faculty in the department to see what their best advice was. A lot of them use active discussion boards. Students were in the program are used to that. They're conditioned to that. But I did do a live session in the halfway through the course, and several of the students came back afterwards to me in the feedback they were providing and said that that was the favorite part of the course for them, because they liked being able to see the other participants of the course and talk to them live and to have that personal interaction. So I think I would keep that in mind and do more of that in the future. I would probably also do more recorded videos of me talking, because they did say they liked it when they saw me in person rather than just either seeing things I was writing or looking at the syllabus or looking at resources I was providing. So really making sure that you're engaging the students in an interactive way is important. And that was the strongest message to me that I received in the feedback, was they liked the live session, they liked seeing me, they liked seeing each other. And yes, the discussions were wonderful and they were contributing to each other and learning from each other. But you can't take away that personal interaction. And you can still do that in a virtual space if you're conscientious enough to incorporate it into the class.
That's interesting. Just as you were talking there, and you were, that interaction might be through a different mode, but it's still there. You can have that instantaneous answer, and you can have a lively discussion and those types of things. And I think that's a positive. But what flashed through my mind when you were talking about that was the potential for you delivering your intercultural competence course, whatever it is that you're teaching, to NAU students, but then also the option of Beijing normal students coming into that classroom, or because of that mode of delivery. So what you lose in that tactile in-person piece, you open up the world, essentially, your classroom potentially to the world, and then it's just through which model you engage that.
That's right. I mean, in my classroom, there were people who were international, but they were living US based. So I did have that sort of cross-cultural communication and experience and dialogue happening. But everybody that was in my classroom was living in the United States at this point, even though I would say at least a handful of them came from abroad originally and was now living in the United States. So I really thought that helped enrich my classroom experience. And this program, this online program, is open. So theoretically, there could be international students from different countries that would now decide to pursue this online program and live abroad. They don't have to live in the United States to pursue it. The other nice thing is some of the material was done synchronously. The live session I did, for example, but a lot of it was asynchronous. So students were able to do it at their own on their own pace, at their own time. I did have dates and deadlines for certain projects to be turned in and submitted, but I think it really allowed a lot of flexibility for student schedules, and that a lot of them were working or they had other responsibilities. So it provided an avenue to pursue such a degree to students that might not be able to do that traditional in-person degree seeking program for 2 years, which is what the typical master's program in the US takes.
Yeah, I want to segue a little bit away from that kind of, and get your thoughts on the recent kind of debacle in relation to inbound international students to the States, and the threats of pulling visas and all that came with that, and then the backstep, and now another attempt at trying to destabilize things. One questions whether really the ultimate effort is to actually just destabilize, or really to push policy in that way. I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know, and I see it myself almost on a daily basis because of my interaction with our folks in the world, is the continued degradation of the good name of America as a location for international education, and many other things at the moment. So it's heartbreaking for people in the industry. But even from a point of view of the business model of certain campuses and the over-reliance on international revenue and what that's doing. What are your thoughts on that whole piece?
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's always this tension between policy and what advocates for international education would like to see in policy. And the recent policies that have come out of the United States have been very challenging and presented a lot of hurdles and hoops to higher ed institutions in the United States when it comes to admitting international students and enrolling them and allowing them to get the visas they need to come to this country. I think what you saw was a consolidated effort like I've never seen before of higher ed education institutions in the United States coming together and advocating for international education in a solid way that I just hadn't seen before in my experience in this field. And so the fact that there was a rescinding of some of those policy efforts told us when we stand together and we advocate together and there's solidarity in our voice, we can be very powerful. And I think that message was well received. Yes, I know there's now sort of some new policies coming forward that relate to new international students. So not necessarily thinking about the ones that are in the United States right now that stayed and didn't go home, but about admitting new ones and allowing them to come in if universities make the decision to solely be online. So again, I think higher ed institutions will have to come together and advocate for a fair and just policy that will allow the students that they've admitted into their programs to participate in those programs to the best of their ability from wherever they are. There's a lot of advocacy, right? There's a lot of sort of push and pull activity that you're seeing happening right now between the field of higher education in general and also the policymakers. So there's this back and forth, but what I really observed that I was impressed by was just the coming together of these institutions of higher education, advocating for what they thought was right as a collective voice. The professional organizations obviously were part of that as well. And if we come together with one voice, we can be very strong and powerful and influence change. And I think that's part of a democracy, right? That's part of what makes the ability of a country like the United States evolve. So I think there's a lot of tension going on right now, and it's not over. I think we'll see more of this happening, unfortunately, as institutions figure out what they're going to do in the fall. Until a vaccine for COVID-19 is available, I think anybody will be hesitant to come back fully in person. And I really want to see support and investment going into our healthcare systems. They need it. And I think also into the research and the development of a vaccine so that we can all sort of resume some sense of whatever our new normal is. I just don't think we're there yet. And I think we would put ourselves at risk by having all campuses be forced to provide in-person instruction in the fall. So that message has come back loud and clear. We have to think about the safety of our campus communities and just our communities writ large before we really reopen in a safe way. So that's where I think right now. I think the international students are doing the best they can, whether they stayed in this country or whether they still are aspiring to come to this country to pursue their education at some point in the near future. And just know that the institutions are advocating for them. The professional organizations in this field are advocating for them. And we will continue to do so until the policies are just and they make sense.
To be devil's advocate for a minute, I personally, I'm opposed to this, but thinking from a logical perspective, if a course is deliverable 100% online and somebody has not entered the United States yet, there really isn't a necessity for them to be here. So I see the logic behind that, but that then discounts, it really distills, well, you're only getting this, it's just purely the education you're looking for, but the education is a means to a better life, to living the life that you want to live. And for many students, international students inbound to Ireland, to America, to Australia, to wherever they're going to go, and they don't necessarily intend to leave. They want to have their life there. They want that American dream, so to speak.
Yep.
And so it's the balance of understanding that in a normal instance, without COVID, those types of things, if you're taking an online degree, there's really no need to be here. But for those that had intended to be here, and now their only choice is an online degree. Some form of flexibility would seem to be the way forward, but vested political interest, obviously, are opposed in certain instances to that. So it's a really interesting situation to be watching, and it's unfolding almost by the day.
It is. It's changing daily, and I agree to some extent. If there's not a need for this person to be on campus, many of these campuses are making the decision not to reopen. So there is that safety element. If there is a need, then I think there should be some sort of opportunity for them to justify why there is a need. What they would be doing that would require them to have some sort of physical presence, even if coursework is online. And I don't know what that is, and it could change depending on the circumstance or situation. If they're involved in anything else like research, or if they were also supposed to be doing something else besides coursework during their tenure at the university. So those will be unique circumstances, and I will rely and defer to our immigration experts to determine what those are. But I do think that most campuses are being very cautious about the reopening plan in the United States right now, and justifiably so. And I think that they have to make the best decisions that they can for their campus community. And whether it's an international student that will be taking online courses or a domestic student that will be taking online courses, they will have to follow the protocols that institution sets out in place. For the fall semester, and maybe even for the academic year. Some institutions will make decisions on a semester by semester basis or by quarter basis.
Yeah, just listening to you there in terms of, the courses or the academic content that requires, an in-person delivery mode. It's interesting, looking at this disruption-led innovation in terms of higher ed and that virtual space, and reading about a couple of companies that are looking at delivering labs courses online, biology labs courses, and those types of things. And the space and the impetus now, and probably the investment, because the opportunity is so raw and palpable at this stage, will, I think, change things for good. It will have this option. No, it's not going to be something that is just a plaster. It's going to be this option or this option from here on out. So it's kind of interesting. But let me just ask you something in relation to internationalization in general, and how important it is in terms of survival and the future of higher education. We're in a situation now where a lot of small private colleges, religious colleges, and even state institutions have been shaken to the foundations in terms of reduction in tuition and demands for refunds and various different things. And we're seeing furloughs and layoffs all over the place. In that situation, there has to be, at a corporate level, a very specific strategic prioritization of where resources are put. So what is the case for maintaining a solid strategy in relation to internationalization, rather than having it take a back step when you're letting 700 faculty go, and the continued dissolution of tenure track relative to short-term teaching positions, and all of those types of things that are now becoming much more amplified in this small 6-month period, which is changing everything. How do we maintain this importance and focus on internationalization in the face of college closures?
I think internationalization, the importance of internationalization has really been demonstrated, for example, through this pandemic. This is not a problem we can solve, any one of us, on our own. And by infusing internationalization efforts into, say, the mission or the strategic planning of an institution, what you're really doing is you're infusing it into teaching, you're infusing it into learning, you're infusing cross-cultural understanding, you're infusing idea sharing into a college or a university's existing platform and mission. So when done properly, internationalization is actually something that's part and parcel of what that institution offers to every student, every faculty, anybody that's part of that campus community. it really, if it's sort of its own separate thing, you know, its own separate pillar, or its own separate goal, it can easily be at risk, and be, you know, in times like this where in crisis, it can easily be in jeopardy of being cut. But when you think about internationalization as teaching these skills, these intercultural communication, these intercultural learning skills, the ability to work with others, whether it's others on your own campus, in your own community, or others in the world to solve these bigger global challenges that we're having, that's when internationalization is so critical and important to these institutions of higher education. If we want to innovate and advance, we can't do that by ourselves. And I think it's been proven over and over again that the best innovations and advancements in research have come from different groups of people coming together. And I think people who think about internationalization as just the core of what an institution has to offer will be able to sustain this work moving forward more easily than those who have thought about it as something extra or something that's added in and something we do in times of success. But as COVID-19 has demonstrated, pandemics, they know no boundaries. They know no geographic boundaries. They know no cultural boundaries. These challenges that we face, whether it's the environment, you know, issues with the environment, issues with disease, these are things that we need to be tackling together. And by infusing internationalization into institutions of higher education, we're teaching our students and the future leaders of this world how to work together and how to engage at this level.
That's hard to argue with that, I have to say.
I really am a strong proponent of it, and I think we have example after example after example of products of successful internationalization and the learning that has happened on our campuses, that has pushed the needle and advanced innovation.
It's, you know, what I feel for those institutions that have programs that are younger, that are, you know, kind of only establishing or are really getting their feet under them. I know one of our partners specifically has shut their international office. It was a one-person office, and really they're you know, of a particular profile of institution that is questioning its existence, and they international travel and study opportunities are taking a back step, and that's really difficult, because I'm quite friendly with the former director, and, you know, has poured his life and heart and soul into things, and now it's gone as an institution. The only thing that we can try and do, and I think this is across the board in terms of COVID and where we are globally at the moment, both the shift to the right and various different things, is to remain positive and keep moving forward, and try not to get caught up with the rabbit in the headlights. And, you know, we have to keep moving forward. We have to, things are darkest before the dawn, you know, all the cliches, all of those.
All of them.
Yeah.
You have to, you have to keep leaning into it and not forsake it for the sake of one crisis. But perhaps this is a wake-up call to figure out how to make it more sustainable moving forward.
I think so. Well, one thing's for sure, the time will pass, and we will either have found as you say, a sustainable way to move forward, or we will not, and it will just take longer. So we might as well get to it, I suppose.
That's right.
Well, look, you know, I'm mindful of your time, but, you know, it's been really, really great chatting. I'm just looking at all the notes in front of me, and we've been, I said it before we started recording, you know, we'll go all over the place, and we seem to have traveled all over. We did. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks for the chat. I think thanks also to our listeners for staying with us, and tune in again next week when we have somebody else from someplace else in international education. But for now, Dale LaFleur, Senior Director of Academic Affairs and Internationalization at NAFSA, thanks so much for your time, and wishing you all the best for the rest of the summer.
All right. Thank you, Chris. It was nice to talk to you today.
Likewise.
Bye.